Datadog is a SaaS, cloud monitoring, and security platform that enables full-stack observability for modern infrastructure and applications at any scale, providing teams dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, UX monitoring, security monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, plus 450 plus out-of-the-box integrations with technologies including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Aggregate all your data into one platform for seamless correlation, enabling teams to troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place, preventing downtime and enhancing performance and reliability. Get started with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm going to jump right into cloud news of the week. It has been a frustrating week for everyone out there when it comes to access and services. And so for our first article, many have probably already seen this. It's been all over the news. Okta got hacked. The ramifications are still kind of falling out. But it has over 15,000 customers, and a hacker group had access to the systems for an unspecified amount of time. Ranges maybe as short as 4 or 5 days, and maybe as long as a couple months as well. And not sure exactly what kind of access yet. So certainly wish them the best as they get through a very challenging week. But in follow-up news or complementary news, the exact same hacker group also got into Microsoft and released some of the source code for Bing Search Engine, Bing Maps, and even Cortana as well. So the leaks have been fast and furious here lately, and something we're certainly going to be keeping an eye on. And along this theme of potential interruptions, Apple had a big outage. Now, what's interesting for me is they've been pretty solid. They haven't had any big widespread outages that I've been able to follow. Now, of course, they're not one of the big cloud providers like AWS and Azure and some of these others, but a lot of people really depend on them, is certainly since they've done their big services play for day-to-day, whether it's could be things for business or certainly for things in personal life as well. So they were hit with a big outage, and hopefully they will be doing a post-mortem on that, and we'll see a reduction of those in the future. And lastly, we want to talk about an acquisition. The acquisition was Chaos Native by Harness. Harness picked up Chaos Native this week, and they released 2 modules, the Harness Service Reliability Management, SRM module, or the Harness Security Testing Orchestration, STO module. Not too much else to report on that, but it is good to see Harness continuing to grow, and we'll keep watching them in the future as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up cloud news of the week, and right after the break, we're going to be talking to Forrest over at Google Cloud and talking about developing multi-cloud skills.
Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Still using SSH keys, RDP logins, and database credentials? It's time to access your infrastructure like it's no longer 1999. StrongDM is the only modern infrastructure access platform. It creates a seamless, secure, and observable air gap between your staff and the critical infrastructure that powers your company. Instantly revoke access to every database, Kubernetes cluster, or server with a click. Automatically log every query, SSH, and kube control command to know who did what, when, and where across your stack. Eliminate credentials from end-user workflows to deploy access that's zero trust and least privilege by default. Trusted by your peers at Peloton, SoFi, Yext, and Chime, StrongDM is the only way to deploy secure access controls in a way folks love to use. But who believes an ad? Check it out for yourself with a no BS demo. Sign up at www.strongdm.com/get-a-demo.
And we're back. And, folks, one of the topics that we talk about a lot, and it sort of gets bounced around in the industry. It's a term or a concept that's been bounced around in the industry quite a bit. And, is it real? Should you care about it? Is it a focus area? Does it add value to your business? And that topic is multi-cloud, right? Meaning, there's a lot of technologies out there. There's a lot of really good cloud choices out there. And what do you do if your business or the choices that you're making around your technology are going to end up spanning multiple cloud environments? Like, what do you do? How do you deal with that? How do you think about it from a technology perspective? How do you think about it from, a business relationship perspective that you have with the cloud? And so really excited today to kind of dig into that. Somebody who we've admired for a very long time, Forrest Brazil, who is head of content at Google Cloud. Forrest, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Hey, thanks so much, Brian. It's great to be here.
We've, Aaron and I both sort of got to know your work and sort of became admirers of your work. You were doing quite a bit of work for A Cloud Guru, who we got to know those guys years ago when they were literally just the two brothers getting started. But, for folks who either maybe know some of your work at A Cloud Guru or, starting to follow the work you're doing at Google, give us a little bit of your background, where you focus on today and how you kind of got to being so well recognized in the community for doing a lot of really interesting things that make technology sort of fun to consume.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting for sure. My IT background it just kind of recapitulates the past few years of IT history. I started my career working on a help desk. I was an IT field engineer. I was racking and stacking servers. I was a database administrator for a while. And around that time, I was working for a large enterprise called Infor, which makes ERP software systems. And They were just starting to move some of their first big hosted applications out of their own data centers into AWS. Charles Phillips, who was the CEO of Infor at that time, had gone on stage at reInvent, and he had talked about friends don't let friends build data centers. I remember we all had that on laptop stickers for a while. So I was on the team that helped move some of those first big applications out of the data centers into the cloud. And figuring out what the automation looked like and what the architecture would look like to do highly available database clusters there. And then I moved on from there to building internal tooling. I worked on a lot of internal DevOps and platform engineering projects, led some teams that did that. I transitioned into consulting for a while, working with companies from startups all the way up to the Fortune 50, mostly helping them design and build large AWS implementations. And somewhere along the way, I started getting very involved in the cloud community. It's something I'm passionate about through writing and speaking and other things. I was an early collaborator with A Cloud Guru even before I worked there. I used to speak at their serverless conf event that they would run. I'd helped to organize that. And I was working with them on the side and eventually transitioned into a role where I was working there full time. Was just helping them to kind of tell their story to the cloud community. And I did that right up until their acquisition by Pluralsight back last summer. And at that time, then I transitioned into the role I have now, which is a departure for me in a cloud sense, because I've moved from being very AWS focused. I was an AWS hero and just really, really hyper focused on that community. And I've moved over to working for Google Cloud now, as you said. I've learned a whole bunch of new things, but, in another sense, some things haven't changed, right? Google Cloud is another fantastic developer-focused provider. I've enjoyed getting to meet a lot of new people, and just to continue to add color and context around the core basic cloud concepts that I've been learning and preaching about, teaching, educating, building on for a long time.
Yeah, you work on you work on a lot of different areas, like you talked about. Your background kind of spans all sorts of things, but I've noticed recently you've been kind of taking a keen interest to this concept of multi-cloud. As you mentioned, you, at least from a cloud perspective, you got started around AWS. You became really well known in that community. What were your thoughts, say 2 or 3 years ago around the concept of multi-cloud, right? When you were, kind of AWS-centric, and how has that sort of shifted? What's sort of, moved some of your interest and some of the work you've been doing lately around exploring what multi-cloud means and what multi-cloud skills mean? Kind of how's your last couple of years thought process gone or perspective changed?
I want to be very clear about this because I think there might be a tendency to hear, someone who's coming from a cloud provider like Google Cloud that's in a challenger position and say, well, of course they're going to talk about multi-cloud because they're not leading the market. Sure. But I have the receipts to prove that I've been bullish on multi-cloud for quite a while, dating back at least 2 or 3 years now. You can go back and look at a blog I wrote back, I think in like late 2019 called it had something to do with AWS Hearts multi-cloud, or if they don't, they will soon. And it was kind of chronicling my career journey, my ideological journey from this standard AWS-centric position that, there's no such thing as multi-cloud, and it's just something vendors are trying to sell you. And really what you need to do is get really bought in on one provider, to realizing that, actually that doesn't bear much relationship to how people are engaging with cloud providers in the real world. And over time, this is becoming more true. As your environments, your cloud footprints get more complex, you may discover that you have acquired a company that is using a different cloud stack, and you're not just going to rebuild that overnight or maybe ever. You may discover that you've got some regulatory or compliance constraints that are forcing you to choose multiple providers for different things, or you may just have a little bit of service envy, where you look over at the other cloud and say, hey, wow, they are really good at doing data analytics. I would like to have that in my stack. Is there any way we could build this workload on cloud A, but keep some of our other core computer storage on cloud B? All those things happen, and none of them are involved with kind of like the classic bad or risky multi-cloud use case, which is to say, I'm going to try to hedge my bets against vendor lock-in, or I'm going to try to create some Frankenstein monster of cloud services glued together between providers to stave off a resiliency problem. Those are, I call those risky choices because they're not really using the clouds for what they're best designed to be doing. But we do see that at the organization level, rather than the workload level, multi-cloud has become fairly inevitable once you cross a surprisingly small threshold of organizational complexity. Lydia Leong at Gartner has done some fantastic work on this as well. She has a post called The Multi-Cloud Gelatinous Cube, and several others that she's written over the past few years, where she's really dived in deep, examining, what are the levers that cause enterprises to make the vendor choices that they do. And I think that over time, the reality has borne this out. We're going to continue to see enterprises and even smaller companies making more and more diverse cloud provider choices. They'll have workloads running in different places based on what makes sense, or just based on the reality they've inherited. And that's fine. That's great. We should celebrate that. We should provide tools and best practices and skills, most importantly, to enable these organizations to be able to grapple with that effectively.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a ton of important points, and I think we've always taken the stance that, look, there will be people who, for various reasons, will say, look, you could look at any of the public clouds, at least, the sort of big three hyperscalers, and to a certain extent say, well, if I was saying I need all this stuff, my stack is going to incorporate all these things, you really could look at any of them and say, well, they all seem to have, reasonable offerings in that space. And so, maybe a single cloud approach makes sense, right? So there's logic that's on that side. And then there's sort of the reality that all of us, who have worked in IT or worked in large organizations deal with, which is, there really is very little sort of central architecture anymore, right? The groups tend to make their own decision. Like you said, acquisitions happen. And then sometimes we get kind of wrapped up with this belief that, oh, there's only 3 clouds, when in reality, you're likely going to attach part of your application out to some SaaS service or an API service or something else. We've always kind of said, look, you need to realize that the reality of technology and stacks is they're really very rarely ever completely pure. And for those of you that are tasked with having to maintain and manage and build these things, you're going to have to deal with, kind of the lack of everything only being one way. And so I very much appreciated the fact that you're now sort of digging into, what do you do if, your reality is, hey, I've got to deal with multiple things, right? Maybe the decision's above your head, or maybe you made the decision on purpose to be using multiple clouds for hopefully good reasons, like you said. What have you found as you're digging into this, especially from a skills perspective? Do you find there's sort of a good thought process to say, hey, how do I think about this? Do you start with the primitives, like how is compute different and storage different? Or, how have you found people, that are tasked with saying, hey, I got to deal with stuff in multiple clouds? How do they start? How do they go about trying to be, competent at dealing with these multiple environments?
Yeah, I mean, somebody's got to be talking about this, sure. Right? So I think it really depends if you're talking about it at the individual level, like at the level of my individual career as a cloud engineer, a cloud architect, whatever. You have to situate yourself in the context that you're in. You may very well be in a shop, or even more specifically on a team that's just focused on one cloud provider, one set of solutions, and that's not likely to change in the near future for you in that context. Yep. And that's totally fine. I would argue that there is still value, there's career value for you in expanding your area of competence to encompass multiple clouds, probably at least 2 cloud providers. And that's because, even if you're just working on one cloud provider in your day-to-day, you're going to have better context to make decisions. You're going to be able to have a better sense of the landscape. You're going to be more situationally aware. If you can compare the services you're using against what might be best-in-class services on a second provider. This is especially important if you want to move up the stack to become like a cloud architect, where you are making more of those technology level build versus buy choices. And it's important if you want to move into a technology leadership role. As you move up the stack away from one particular workload and you're starting to make choices at the level of an entire organization, which, again, as we said, is increasingly going to encompass probably workloads from either multiple of the big 3 cloud providers, or almost certainly you're going to be incorporating other third-party SaaS solutions. You're going to have some Datadog, some Snowflake, some Cloudflare, whatever in the mix. It's going to happen. I mean, it's true just about everywhere. And as a technical leader, you're going to need to have that view of the landscape and understand when you'd want to bring in one of these third-party solutions versus using whatever the cloud provider has natively. You want to know the trade-offs of that. All of those, in my opinion, fall under the bucket of multi-cloud skills. And so it behooves you, as you look at opening those career doors for yourself, to get good at having those kind of conversations. Now, with all of that said, how are you going to build those skills practically as an engineer, especially if you're not building on multiple clouds day in and day out? I can provide a few recommendations. Number one, you were kind of pointing toward this at the end of your question, Brian. Yeah, it is the case that a lot of the primitives, a lot of the basics, there's a lot of analogies, there's a lot of similarities between the providers at the compute level, at the storage level, the concepts of how they handle IAM and networking, virtual networking. There are differences, but again, they're thinking about probably availability in the same way, like regions and zones. They're going to have some important differences. They're going to have a lot of similarities as well. And so, I think there's a sense in which cloud competence does transfer. It's kind of like, I've had a lot of people make this analogy to me. It's like learning one language, not a programming language, but a human language, spoken language, inside of a language family like the Romance languages, which are, they derive from Latin, but they include French and several others. Right. If you learn one of those languages, it's quite easy to learn another one, say Spanish, right? And that's kind of how it is with cloud providers too. You learn AWS, again, you're going to it's going to be easier for you to transfer a lot of those concepts to Google Cloud. I would recommend picking a cloud provider that is your quote unquote native language, though, your first language, your heart language, I've heard some people call it, where you you've built a lot on it. You're very comfortable with it. You dream in that cloud provider, as it were. So I would recommend going very deep on that provider, because that's how you'll show expertise. That's what will probably enable you to get hired somewhere, is because you've shown that you do that better than anybody in the world. And then I would recommend going broad on a secondary provider. Sometimes I position this as build on your primary cloud, get certified on your secondary cloud. And this is me, who used to work at a cloud guru / Pluralsight, right? So this is my minor plug for certifications, but also it's me putting them in context of where they have value and where they're limited. Because certifications don't necessarily show hands-on expertise, but they do give you a really great exposure to the broad scope of what that cloud can do. So build on your primary, get certified on your secondary. And then finally, I would recommend, as you think about building kind of a flexible, portable skill set that you can move from cloud to cloud, as you potentially take on different roles, work on different teams that have different stacks over the course of your career, I would focus on getting really good at cloud-specific managed services. So on Google Cloud, that could be something like BigQuery, which is a fantastic differentiated service, or Google Cloud Spanner, their relational distributed service. I would focus on getting really good at those kind of things that the clouds do better than anybody else. But I would focus on also getting good at multi-cloud tooling. So things like Terraform. No matter where you're working, you're likely going to have some of that in your environment. If you're doing anything with containers, Kubernetes is probably going to be involved. Make sure you know those tools that all the cloud providers are end up building on, because those are going to be valuable anywhere, as opposed to potentially working with a supporting service that the cloud provider has that only works with their stuff. And if you move out of a cloud specific paradigm at all, it's not going to be useful to you. So cloud native services, multi-cloud tooling. Yeah. And if you progress in that way, you're going to have a lot of options, Brian.
Yeah. And I think you highlight a couple of things, and I want to kind of contrast a couple of things, because I get a chance to talk to a lot of different companies, and there's some who start down the path very much like you said. Hey, we're kind of all in on a cloud, and typically what that all in means is like, well, that was the first one we chose. We're still in this kind of transition from our data center to the public cloud. And one of the things I've heard, and I'd love to kind of get your feedback, is the contrast is like, hey, we picked this cloud, we're going to kind of quote unquote go all in. And then you'll talk to a different company, and they're kind of more wrapped up in this idea of, we got burned in the past by, kind of being tied to a vendor. So we have this, we don't want to be tied to vendor lock-in, however they phrase it. And so they kind of go, well, we're going to make everything kind of, we're going to try and abstract everything away, so we treat all the clouds the same. And I feel like one of the things that kind of gets lost in that secondary approach is, if you're moving from the data center to any cloud, it doesn't matter which one you pick, just the transition of how the public cloud works, the way that you're going to automate things differently, the way that it scales differently, the way that you think about provisioning, things don't have to be forever, they can be on demand. You're almost, and I think you were kind of hitting on this before, you're almost doing yourself a disservice by not going deep on that first in cloud environment you're in, just to learn the difference in how to take advantage of what the cloud can do for you that's different than your data center. And I feel like that step sometimes gets lost by the folks who are thinking, well, I want to avoid lock-in, and you're not so much thinking like, how do I get good at doing cloud first? And then, if, like you said, if you don't want to get tied to a tool, or you have to use something else, I feel like if you know how to do public cloud well, in the context of on demand and how it automates and how it scales and so forth, that becomes really transferable to a secondary cloud if that becomes something that you have to deal with. Do you find that conversation or those sort of differing approaches, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I try to encourage people to think about it as a ladder, or maybe even as opposed to a spectrum. So you're going to have a maturity progression as you leave the data center. And I remember very clearly going through this at the point in my career that I was describing to you, where you'll land in the cloud, and you'll likely be doing some things in quote unquote lift and shift fashion. Sure. If you're bringing existing workloads with you, because that's how you learn. You can sit there for 2 years and try to architect out this perfect state of the art, best practices, cloud native approach. But until you actually get hands-on in the cloud and start working with it, it's all going to be meaningless.
Right.
And a lot of times it's better just to do something, make some progress, show some value, build some confidence with your ops team, and then potentially refactor and move more toward maybe more cloud native workloads. You see people who they've been quote unquote all in on cloud for a couple of years, and then you look at what they've actually done, and it's just some toy workloads that they've moved because they're just kind of paralyzed about the idea of actually taking the giant ball of mud that drives the business and truly moving it in the cloud. So I would say don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good there. Go ahead and move, do something, and then figure out how to make it better. But yeah, so if you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to create this abstraction layer where I have no dependency on any specific cloud service, I really feel like it's rare to see that succeed.
Yeah,
Brian. And again, I know people that have done it. I know people that are doing it. I know people that are bought in on it. But it just you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds, in my opinion. You're getting the potentially the cost of cloud while also not getting the deep integration with best-in-class services that make cloud worth using in the first place.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think to a certain extent, once you make the decision to go to public cloud, so you're in the data center, you decide to go to public cloud. I mean, I think part of that decision needs to be, look, yes, there are trade-offs, but those trade-offs, in a lot of cases, and we now have, more than a decade of experience to show that, you need to be fairly committed to that those trade-offs are beneficial to you, right? The ability to do scaling, the ability to get access to world-class innovation, like you almost need to double down on that to a certain extent, because if you think about the cloud as nothing but just somebody else's data center, like you said, you're going to do a lot of work for very little value, and then at some point you're going to be sort of going, well, why did we do this in the first place? Because I'm still dealing with, we brought all our processes as well as our big balls of mud applications. I mean, I feel like there's a point where you go, it's just like committing to a new diet or committing to just a new routine in your life. Like there's a reason you went to it. You got to live at least part of that. Pretty.
Yeah, you got to keep climbing the ladder that I was talking about, and I've called this in the past the lift and shift shot clock. I have a blog post somewhere talking about this back at A Cloud Guru, where you can land in the cloud doing certain things the way you were used to doing them in the data center, perhaps still managing some things manually, having some servers that are treated in pet-like fashion, but you're going to have a limited amount of time to transition that before the creeping costs of porting your legacy practices to the cloud, running your workloads expensively using the cloud as a data center, that starts to overtake the advantages you got from moving quickly to the cloud in the first place, getting familiarity, giving yourself time to learn and plan for version 2. And there's some point where those two lines meet, and then at that point the shot clock has expired. And if you haven't moved on, if you haven't become more cloud native, you've kind of obviated the need to go to cloud in the first place.
Yeah. I want to ask you kind of a Google specific question. I know we didn't kind of frame it this way, but Google has been, of the three kind of big cloud providers, probably the most vocal about saying, hey, we can talk about multi-cloud, but like here's some tangible technologies that potentially can do multi-cloud stuff. So there's aspects of Anthos, there's aspects of BigQuery. I suspect you get a chance to be part of those conversations somehow. How does that conversation sort of go over in the marketplace in terms of, do people sort of go, oh, wow, okay, we didn't realize that there was possibilities to create these services that, could be consistent in places, or like how do some of those conversations go, maybe from Google's perspective, or, the people that Google talks to?
Yeah, and I'm not the expert on all of this. There's people inside of Google Cloud that could give a much better and fuller answer to that question than I could. But here's my perspective from where I sit. And you brought up BigQuery, which is doing some cool things now with like BigQuery Omni, where you could basically have your data sit in BigQuery, but you're still able to go out and interoperate with data sources in S3 and other places. It's Google Cloud saying, hey, we recognize that you live in a world where you've got complex environment, data traveling from multiple places. You want to be able to use the tools like BigQuery that work for you. But you still, want to, you don't want to have it walled off in its own sandbox. You want to have it play with your entire environment. And Google Cloud's going to meet you where you are. I think that's a useful approach. It's a pragmatic approach. Same with Anthos, right? Where, you might want a single management pane of glass for your clusters, but you may have some workloads running on premises. You may have them running in other clouds, and that's okay. If you were starting an environment from scratch and could choose where to put all of your containers, would you put them all in GKE? I probably would, but that's not reality. That's not where everybody is. So I think providing those tools to let people grow and advance up that ladder at their own pace is a fantastic thing. I'm really, really glad that Google Cloud is doing that.
Yeah, and I think especially when BigQuery Omni came out, we were kind of excited because the analogy that sort of jumped to mind for us was, when we both live in North Carolina, but Aaron and I, have forever sort of said, look, we're not going to live in Silicon Valley. It just doesn't fit, what we want to do in life. And there were things that sort of restricted you from how you could be a successful worker because you weren't in the room when your team in Silicon Valley was doing stuff. And I think we've seen that. When you allow things to sort of work best where they natively live, and then build systems that allow them to interconnect, some pretty powerful things happen. Or you kind of take away the restriction of purely location, being the boundary. So I'm glad to see even if it's only a few services that start to say, hey, look. The reality of IT is, things are going to be where they're going to be. How can technology start to sort of create some blurred lines or, blend some things together? So, we're kind of excited to see that sort of thinking begin to happen, especially for things like data that are so hard to move, whether for cost reasons or just data gravity reasons. So, good to hear that sort of thinking is going on. And I assume people are asking for it because you don't necessarily just build things to build things.
Right. There's a gigantic surface area of IT that has yet to move to cloud, as we know, and a large percentage of it is going to be moving in the next 5 years. I think the pandemic trends have accelerated that for sure. The remote work trends that you're mentioning have absolutely accelerated that. People are realizing that moat-based approach to your corporate network just doesn't scale when everybody's working from home and trying to connect back into that network. And so it's time to think about remote collaboration tools. It's time to think about zero trust, and Google Cloud is right there.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last question, and this is a little bit off topic. One of the things that you've become sort of well known for is you're a bit of a poet, a bit of a songwriter. You found some very interesting creative ways to sort of communicate technology, and one of those is in songs. I'm curious, like just the thought process. How do you go about deciding? Hey, I want to do it, and then how does the process work?
It's gotten to the point, Brian, where I have a list of song requests that's so long that I would never have time to do all of them. So at this point, I feel like I don't need to go out fishing for ideas. I just have to try to find time to do things that people have asked me to do. It's something that I've done for a few years now, just because it's personally fun for me. I like processing information for myself that way, musically, and it seems to help people connect with concepts that can be a little bit arcane. And so I'm trying to write about things that I found difficult to understand in other contexts. I'll give you an example. I'm actually working on a song right now about service meshes, which is a concept I found arcane and hard to get my head around. But it turns out that, writing this song has forced me to dive pretty deep into what does Istio actually do? And, wait a minute, why wasn't Kubernetes doing this already? Help me understand why it's so important to separate the application from the network. And what are the problems being solved by this that aren't being solved by other technologies? When would I not want to use this? Sometimes they say the best way to learn something is to teach it to other people. And for me, an even better way sometimes is to try to teach it in song, just because it forces you to be so concise and try to put a little bit of whimsy and creativity around it. So first and foremost, I do it for myself as a processing technique, but it seems to help other people as well.
Yeah, no, and we love it. We've sort of been fans of it because I think, like you said, it does force you to be concise, and second, technology, unfortunately, tends to be very dull sometimes, very, go read the docs and listen to long webinars. And so, anybody who's trying to make it a little more fun or a little more I got to imagine to a certain extent you make it approachable, right? Like, oh, okay, well, here's a complex topic like service mesh. This guy just, he made it fun for 2 minutes. I dug into it. It was interesting. And now I'm going to go, kind of go read that 30-page document and go and do it. So yeah, we appreciate you're using your sort of passion to dig through some stuff that's pretty complicated. So cool to hear how the process works. Last thing, I guess, before we wrap up, what's the best way for folks if, I know you've been reaching out to people saying, hey, how do we help people, with their multi-cloud skills, or even just, kind of the areas that you're passionate about? What are some ways for folks to get in touch with you, to engage around the things you're working on? How do you like to engage with communities?
Yeah, well, I'm available in a lot of places. I'm pretty active on Twitter at Forrest Brazil. You can always hit me up there if you have a question. I run a community initiative called the Cloud Resume Challenge, which I've been doing for a while. It's got an active Discord community with several thousand people in there. It's also a website, and there's a book associated with it. But at its core, it's a free initiative to help you build cloud skills in a hands-on way. And there's AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud versions of the challenge. So if you're looking for something fun to do this weekend that gets you really hands-on with full stack cloud skills, you come out of it with a project you can put on your resume, because you're putting your resume in the cloud as part of the project. It's kind of nice the way that dovetails. So check that out. I'm very active in that community. I'd love to meet you.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We'll get all that stuff in the cloud in the show notes. I know we subscribe to the newsletter. You do an awesome job of just at the most basic level helping people find jobs and having people go, I got skills. I got jobs available. How do we match those with skills? And you do an awesome job with all those things. So, Forrest, thank you so much for the time. It's been fun to connect, and we really appreciate you, kind of sharing your passion and kind of talking through this topic that sometimes gets a little bit sideways in terms of people having biases. But we appreciate you kind of cutting through the noise, folks. With that, Aaron and I want to thank Forrest for his time today. Appreciate his insight and his knowledge. We're going to wrap that up. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for giving us feedback on the show, whether it's sending us a note, show@thecloudcast.net, or giving us feedback in all the ways that you get your podcast. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.